Hello everybody and welcome back. You're tuned into the RPG Radio. My name is Winback and on today's video we'll be going into part 2 of the Deceiver, the Inquisitor and Occultist Specialist in our Doombolt. This is the build that will be one-shotting people with red lightning raining from the sky every chance that we get. This video will be focused on some more devotions. We have a couple additions to our skill bar that need to be taken into account, and there is some gear that you can pick up throughout the game that will be massively helpful once you hit level 50. We are at level 50 in the video right now, so everything that I'm going to be talking about in this build should be on your character, or at least close to finding it if you can. Monster infrequents, as always, are very easy to get a hold of as long as you are hunting down the right monsters, but some of the other gear in this build at this moment is epic or legendary, and that requires a little bit more looking to do. So if you don't have them, they're more of a suggestion at this point rather than a guaranteed necessary item to have. Before we get into any of the changes with the build though, I do want to start off with our Relic. It is new, it is improved, and it is terrifying. The Terror Relic is going to be your upgrade from the last Relic in the last video. This specific Relic is going to give you quite a big boost in damage as well as options on your skill bar. Terror is just going to check a lot of boxes in the Relic department, and we won't need to upgrade this again until about level 65, and beyond that we won't need to upgrade it a fourth time until level 90. That said, Terror is going to be giving you flat chaos damage, buffing your already huge amounts of chaos damage, is going to reduce target's damage against you for 3 seconds. You're going to get a big chunk of spirit as well as a defensive ability, and you are going to get increased energy regeneration from Terror by quite a substantial either 12 to 18%. On top of all of those things, probably the best part about Terror, not including its activatable ability, is going to be the final passive stat that it gives us, which is +1 to all occultist skills. This singular relic is going to buff your entire occultist tree by a pretty substantial margin, and it's going to actually free you up some points in your Doombolt category if you've already got that maxed out completely. As this video goes on, we're going to have a lot of gear that fills in points for Doombolt, and when you overmax that ability, you're taking those skill points out and putting them into abilities that need them more. So, essentially, this build has Doombolt maxed over, at this stage right now, about 5 points. So that's 5 points that we can take out at the Spirit Guide and dump into other abilities like Sigil or Soleil's Witchfire, any of those things that may need the points more than the Doombolt do. We can do that because it is overmaxed by all of our gear and the +1 from our Relic. After the +1 to all occultist abilities though, it has got even more utility in an activatable ability that will go right down there on your hotbar next to your Doombolt. Terror is the skill that it provides, and when you use this ability, it is going to activate in a 3-meter radius, dealing a pretty decent chunk of chaos damage, but it's also going to terrify the target's hit for 2.5 seconds. It'll also reduce their resistances for 3 seconds, but more importantly, the fear will make them spread out, walk away from you as you are dealing damage to everybody who wasn't hit. Given that we're only on normal though, the Terror button is actually just disintegrating people. It is almost a second Doombolt at this point in a much smaller area, and depending on the enemies that are hit, they will just vanish from existence like they have been Thanos snapped right out of 2019. Terror is 100% your best relic at this point, and you should be doing everything that you can to equip this, or at least find the blueprint to equip this, because it is the pinnacle of what you can do up until level 65 or so. Once we hit our next relic landmark, this one is going to sit in our gear for quite a while. With the Relic conversation done though, I think that is the easiest part of this build to achieve. It is a really big power spike for what you can get from it. So again, pick it up as quick as you can, but let's focus on some changes that happened with our skill bar and abilities that we're using in this build that may have not been present in the last video. I mentioned that our little bird buddy helped me get leveled up to the point where we could use Doom Bolts, but it turns out he's going to run out of effectiveness without enough points in him, and I really don't want to use him in Ultimate. So we are taking all of the points out of the Summon Familiar ability, and we're going to instead put those in the Curse of Frailty. Curse of Frailty is doing a number of things for our builds. First of all, it activates in a very large AoE, and it doesn't have a skill cooldown, so if you end up spamming it, you can hit quite a few people with it. At this point, you're not going to want to spam it, you're going to want to aim it a little bit better because it does end up choking out your energy bar quite a bit. But when you land this ability, you're going to be reducing the physical resistance and bleeding resistance of targets you hit, which may not seem very important, but at this point, anytime that we hit a person with our two-handed weapon, they are going to take a large chunk of physical damage. Not only that, but Curse of Frailty is slowing the targets that are hit, so if you are in the method of kiting people more with your Doom Bolt and your Terror abilities, then things are going to be that much easier because they won't be chasing you very hard. I know the base point into Curse of Frailty doesn't sound too exciting, and there is a good reason for that, because the modifier for Curse of Frailty is much more important than the skill itself. Now, you won't be able to get away with just a single point into Curse of Frailty because we do want to get the radius of this ability increased as much as possible, but once you are able to use Vulnerability, which is the next upgrade for the ability, you really start to see how much better this is going to be working for our build. Vulnerability is the part of this Curse of Frailty move that is going to be reducing vitality and elemental resistance, which is overall helping our damage output because we do vitality damage in a pretty significant amount, and after that, fire damage is our next contributing factor. We'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in the later part of this video, but the metal that we're using on this build is going to be adding a lot of fire damage to our Doom Bolt, meaning that that elemental resistance shred is going to be just as effective as the vitality resistance shred. But more importantly than those two opportunities that you'll get from vulnerability, the biggest, baddest part is going to be the reduction in defensive ability on this ability that you can just spam to high hell. The defensive ability reduction at level 7 is going to drop enemies down 52 defensive ability. If we get all 10 points into this, and even consider overmaxing it by a few points, we can get almost 90 defensive ability removed from enemies before we hit them with a massive amount of doom energy from the sky. The reason you want to reduce defensive ability is because the higher your offensive ability is than the enemy's defensive ability, the higher your chance to crit. You want Doom Bolt to crit as often as possible because it is increasing in crit damage, and that is something that we will stack up as the game goes on. That'll be a stat that becomes very important for this build, and making sure that everything that gets hit with our Doom Bolt dies almost instantaneously. After picking up the Curse of Frailty and Vulnerability though, we're going to take another look at other abilities that may have gone by the wayside on the Inquisitor tree. I mentioned in the last video that we do have a couple to pick up, but the most important one I want to talk about is Inquisitor Seal. Now, Inquisitor Seal works a lot like Sigil of Consumption, but also works a lot differently. Inquisitor Seal is a big AoE circular summon that you will lay on the ground, and it has its own abilities. It also has its own health bar, which is a little bit disappointing that it can die, but you know, I'm not a game dev, I don't get to make those decisions. However, the cool part about it being a summon is that the devotion that we're going to attach to it, which is the Flame Torrent from the Fiend devotion, will actually activate around the seal itself instead of our character. So when the seal hits targets with its damaging abilities, it has a chance to activate the Flame Torrent, which is that big circular flame all around it in a pretty significant amount of damage. It doesn't have much of a cooldown either, so all the enemies that end up standing on top of the seal will get hit with the Flame Torrent pretty consistently. You can have 3 Inquisitor Seals summoned at any given time, and the range it's pretty short compared to Sigil of Consumption, but the amount of damage that you can get out of them in the area that they cover for the amount of time that they cover will be incredibly useful once the difficulty starts to scale and those enemies get bigger health bars. Because of the damage that it's doing, because of the devotion attached to it, Inquisitor Seal is going to be incredibly effective, and once we get later into Ultimate, we can start making decisions about whether or not we want to change the damage that it's doing, because at the moment, it is only going to be doing fire damage with its Rebuke ability. That said, the abilities that it comes with are number 1, Barrier, which activates in a fairly large radius, but it's going to increase your health regeneration, and it is going to give you a flat damage absorption while you are within that radius. So any damage that is done to you in an instance from an enemy has to go through that damage absorption first, and then the health regeneration and elemental resistance that you'll get by standing on it too. So this is an incredibly good defensive ability if it does force you to stand still for just a little bit. Rebuke is its offensive ability, and this activates in the same radius that the Barrier does, but it is going to be dealing fire damage to any enemy that crosses that line, and it is going to deal increased damage, or it's going to buff damage that you do to Ethereals, Chthonians, Ethereal Corruptions, and Eldritch enemies. So basically, standing within the Inquisitor Seal is going to make you deal quite a bit of damage, while the summon itself does quite a bit of damage on its own. After you take Inquisitor Seal, you'll want to take at least 1 point into Arcane Empowerment. Arcane Empowerment is going to add on some extra stats to the ability, and while we don't necessarily need them maxed out in normal, they will become very important for Ultimate and Elite as we continue on. But as far as the basic stats of Arcane Empowerment go, we'll be getting piercing and elemental damage added on in a flat amount. You're going to be getting buffs to all damage, an increase to crit damage, and some flat fire retaliation damage on top of everything else. This means that when you are standing in the Seal's AoE, all of these bonuses are going to transfer to you, and like I mentioned earlier, this is going to make more sense once we get into Ultimate, maybe even Elite, but increasing that crit damage, making sure that Doombolt can do all the damage that it is equipped to do is very, very good. You can also put a point into Runic Seal, which is the single point modifier for this ability, but ultimately that is only going to help you if you are using a two-handed melee or a two-handed ranged weapon. You can't use this if you go the route of a one-handed weapon with a caster offhand, or if you try to dual wield weapons with this build. So just remember, you have to have a two-hander, but with Runic Seal you'll reduce the skill cooldown time and you'll reduce the energy cost, meaning that when you are whipping out those abilities so often as you usually do in the early game, you won't be struggling so hard to keep up your little green bar in the meantime. Now there is only one new ability to talk about left, and that will be the Blood of Dreeg. This is an occultist heal button that will be doing quite a bit for us in terms of just flat healing, and as the game progresses, it'll be doing more for us in physical resistance getting into Ultimate. So, for now, all you really need is a few points into Blood of Dreeg, the base ability, and this ability itself will activate for 60 seconds. This lasts a full minute when you hit the heal button, but it's going to give you a 16% health restoration. You are going to get acid damage added onto your base ability, along with offensive ability and health regen and acid retaliation on top of everything else that it does. Blood of Dreeg increasing your offensive ability is by far the most important part of what it can do. So remember, like I mentioned, every time that offensive ability comes up, it goes into Doombolt, it goes into Doombolt's ability to crit, and that is far and away the most important part of this build. So anything that can give us more offensive ability is already worth its weight in gold. That said though, don't sweat maxing that out just yet, because the ability is only going to be semi-important when it comes to normal. You really just want it for the heal button, and that's all you should have to worry about. But with that out of the way, our abilities are locked in for the rest of the build, and we can talk about a couple new devotions that came about while we were farming up to level 50. I mentioned it in the last video, but we are using Eye of the Guardian as our next finished devotion, and that is because the amount of damage that it is doing, along with the type of damage that it is doing, is going to be pretty significant when we fix it to our Sigil of Consumption. Guardian's Gaze is the ability that you'll be equipping to the Sigil of Consumption, and that is going to be the one that spawns the eyeballs that spin around your character that will get you health back, deal acid and poison damage, but also chaos damage. They're also dealing 15% of your weapon damage, and they should hit pretty hard because they'll activate very often, and they will spin through and hit people multiple times if you are in melee range. Guardian's Gaze works incredibly well with Sigil of Consumption because you can put so many sigils down, because they activate on an AoE for as long as they last, and you can get this up pretty consistently. So a 15% chance on attack when you have 3 to 4 sigils down, hitting big groups of enemies is going to get you lots and lots of eyeballs to deal lots of damage. But the newest devotion that I want to talk about is the Soleil's Witchblade. Not to be confused with the passive Soleil's Witchfire. Soleil's Witchblade is going to be doing a lot for our character passively, and we're going to equip it to our Doombolt. Unfortunately, this ability is another 15% chance on attack, and we don't necessarily have any new abilities coming down the pipe that will make that easier to land. So, Doombolt is on a relatively longer cooldown compared to the Inquisitor Seal and the Sigil of Consumption, but the good news about the ability that comes with Soleil's Witchblade is that it has a 4-second duration, so all things considered, every Doombolt that you fire off should have a pretty consistent chance of giving you these buffs for the entire duration. That said, the passive stats that it's giving you, you're going to get 40% chaos damage buffed right off the bat. You're getting physique, spirit, and offensive ability next, followed by some more chaos buffing, 15 defensive ability, and a buff to your fire damage, culminating in your last point before the ability with more buffs to fire and chaos damage with even more defensive ability after that. So, all things considered, it is a pretty balanced devotion, I would say, giving you some defensive stats while also buffing your incredibly important damage stats. But once you get to Eldritch Fire and you activate Doombolt with it, for 4 seconds you'll be getting a flat fire and chaos damage increase to everything that you do, as well as reducing the movement speed, reducing the fire and chaos resistance of targets that are hit on top of everything else. In essence, this ability is perfect for Doombolt because when it activates, it'll be making Doombolt do all that more damage, reducing the resistances of the 2 specific damage types that Doombolt is doing in this build. Eldritch Fire is going to apply to everything that we do, but mainly it's going to be focused on making Doombolt better because Doombolt is the absolute focus of this build. That's going to do it for devotions as far as this video goes, though, because the Soleil's Witchblade does take 5 points. So a lot of what we're doing to build up to our Dying God and our Abomination Tree gets kind of eaten up, at least in terms of the video, because we don't have that many shrines towards this point of the game. And all things considered, devotions are going to get spent in smaller places before they get to those bigger places in the next video. So stay tuned for that if you are waiting for the end of the devotion tree, but remember, for the time being, Soleil's Witchblade is pretty much where you'll be at when you are level 50 on this build. We're not done yet though. There is a few more things to talk about for this build, and they are mostly going to revolve around your monster infrequent pickups. Now, as far as when you'll pick these up, there are a couple. Well, there is only really one that you can pick up prior to getting into the Logorian and ending the base game of Grimdawn, and that will end up being your medal. This is the Bloodsworn Sigil, and this drops from quite a few Chaos Cultist enemies, but what it does for your build, like I mentioned earlier, is going to increase the damage of Doombolt by quite a big amount. Now, as far as the passive stats of this medal go, you're going to be getting buffs to fire and chaos damage right out of the gate. You're going to be getting flat, cunning, and spirit bonuses as well, and the percent increases you're going to start getting are the spirit and health bar increases. So you can get anywhere from 7 to 11 spirit from the medal specifically, which is increasing your magic damage, and the increases to health are always welcome because when you're a squishy caster build, you do not want to be getting one shot by a random auto attack from whoever is coming directly at your face. More importantly than those things though, this medal is going to give you plus 3 points into Doombolt and plus 3 points into Endless Flame, which is an Inquisitor modifier that we will not be using, so you can ignore that being a good point. If you're the type of person who wants to use that Inquisitor ability, feel free. I think it works incredibly well with this build. I just have another build already focused on doing just that, so it's not as important to me. It does work really well with your Guardian's Gaze. You can spawn hella eyeballs with that thing if you just sit there and channel the Flames of Ignifar, but it's not something I wanted to use in this build because I wanted to make Doombolt my #1 priority. That said, feel free to go that route if you want to. I have another Deceiver build on the channel that is a bit more pet focused, that does use both Doombolt and Flames of Ignifar together, and they're pretty cool. There is a set that you can use called the Harbinger set, and that will dump a bunch of points and extra ability into those two things, but that is neither here nor there. We're talking about the Bloodsworn Sigil, which is going to add 250 fire damage to Doombolt, and it is going to convert 100% of the vitality damage to fire damage for the Doombolt as well. The reason that this is important is because you may have noticed in the earlier part of this video that we're still able to delete a lot of chaos enemies with our Doombolt specifically, and the reason is because we have that fire damage rather than the vitality and chaos damage all on its own. When the fire damage hits those enemies, they don't have as big resistances as they do for the chaos and vitality damage, so we're getting a good chunk of damage that they're not avoiding while reducing those resistances, like we mentioned with our devotion earlier, and it's really helping to keep them from tanking everything that we can do with our big singular angry ability. So that being said, it also does some conversion for Flames of Ignifar that we're not worried about, but those Doombolt conversions are the big reason that we want the Bloodsworn Sigil, and the plus 3 points into Doombolt itself are wickedly good for spreading the love further as Doombolt gets overmaxed into oblivion. After you are done with your Bloodsworn Sigil though, you'll actually go and get the next item, which is our shoulders, directly from the final boss of the base game, which is the Loghorrean. The Loghorrean is going to die and give you Loghorrean's corruption from any of the chests that will inevitably pop up once you kill the Loghorrean. There are 3 that usually do, and one of them will have these shoulder pieces in there. What these shoulders are going to do, just as base stats, you're going to get buffs to piercing damage, which is completely negligible. You don't care about that whatsoever. But you do get a flat increase to health, which is going to couple very well with our Bloodsworn Sigil. So that flat increase to health is already helping that percent increase to health that I mentioned earlier. We're getting a percent increases to offensive and defensive ability, which is nuts because percent increases to those scale very well. You're also getting physical resistance added on here in a small amount, but considering that you can't really get over 40% with the physical resistance side of things, anywhere from 4 to 5% is still pretty good. After that, you're getting Pierce, Lightning, Poison and Acid, and Elemental Resistance. You are getting tons of resistances from these shoulders, and that in and of itself is, again, worth its weight in gold, especially as we start making our way into Elite and getting ready to lose some of those right out of the base of the difficulty increase. More than that, though, the shoulders are giving us a big bump in points to, you guessed it, Doom Bolts, and also Flames of Ignifar. It sounds like they really want us to use that ability, and as much as I think it would be good, I am dedicated to my Doom. So another +3 into Doom Bolt is nothing to shake a stick at because, again, overmaxing this ability becomes a priority as it deals damage, and you can spread out those points to other abilities to really help it shine even better. Now, there are 2 more items that I think really fill out this build very well, and these are more dependent on if you get lucky enough to pick them up. So, the first is going to be the Scythe of Tenebris. This is a 2-handed scythe weapon that does all the things that we need it to. Mainly, it's giving us chaos damage in the form of the weapon itself does chaos damage as a base, not physical damage. It is going to add chaos damage in the flats to our kit, and it is going to convert a lot of the attack damage that we do into health. So it's a vampiric weapon at the end of all things as well. It is buffing chaos damage, and it is converting vitality damage into chaos damage as well. And given that vitality damage is basically our secondary form of damage, that is a pretty big conversion. Scythe of Tenebris is actually going to do it from 40 to 60%, converting from vitality to chaos, so that is a massive jump in our chaos damage pool. We're also getting a flat health, a boatload of offensive ability, and skill cooldown reduction on top of the pièce de résistance, the +4 to Doom Bolt. So, Scythe of Tenebris is an enormous damage spike if you can get a hold of it. Even the empowered version, I would think, is going to be very useful. Even though I haven't hit level 75 yet with this build, I imagine the empowered version and the base version are very similar, with just scaled up stats to compensate for the increased level. So if you can get a hold of a Scythe of Tenebris, I 100% recommend it until you find a legendary counterpart that will inevitably do more and the same of what it does. The other piece of equipment that you really want to farm for, if possible, but you really need to get lucky on, is the Devil's Cage Halberd. This is chest armor, and ultimately, if you find one of these on any of the characters that you it builds in Grim Dawn, because you should have an entire repertoire in this game. Building one character is kind of lame, I'm going to be honest with you, because there is so much to do, in so much to create. There is so many opportunities that you can have in Grim Dawn for building other characters, and while you are farming on those, you may inevitably come across the Devil's Cage Halberd. This piece of armor is so incredibly good for soldiers and occultists that you should share it around any build that is not using it, because it will be the absolute best thing that they can have at level 50. So the Devil's Cage is going to be giving you a flat physical damage. It'll buff your physical damage, but you're also getting chaos and internal damage buffs as well. You're getting a big chunk of health, a big chunk of defensive ability, as well as physical resistance, and an absolutely unheard of amount of fire resistance. You can get anywhere from 96% to 144% fire resist from this chest piece. And that, I don't need to tell anybody, will scale all the way up to ultimate, because ultimate is only going to remove 50%, and if you've got a Devil's Cage that's doing 144% resistance and fire, it's not going to take you all the way down to 80. It is crazy how much that they put into this piece of armor. You also get bleeding resistance, which is another stat that you may end up not finding a lot on your other armor, and more importantly, you're going to get +3 into Sigil of Consumption. Because Sigil is one of our really big backup dancers, that +3 is incredibly helpful for rounding it out and getting it at least regular maxed out in the interim. The final thing that the Devil's Cage is going to do for you is the Devil's Cage ability. You have a 100% chance when you are hit to activate a root that will hit multiple enemies. It has a 6-second cooldown, but a 4-second duration on the root, and it is going to deal physical and chaos damage while removing defensive abilities of the monsters that are hit. So basically, you'll get hit, you will activate the root from your Devil's Cage for 4 seconds, and by the time that 4 seconds is up, you should have a Doom Bolt coming directly down on whoever is caged so that they can just be disintegrated with that ability. The whole point of this build is the Doom Bolt, and the Devil's Cage makes that so much more potent. It is fantastic. But that is going to do it for me, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Part 3 will be on its way next week, so we can talk about that completed devotion tree, another increase in our relic usage, and see if we can find some more cool legendaries to throw into this build to round us out even further. Thanks so much for hanging out yet again. I'll catch you all next time. Peace out.